Hey guys, in this video, we're going to be picking up where I left off, and the last one kind of ended abruptly. There's issues with my internet, so I apologize for that. So I believe the last thing we talked about was we got through the meaningful life, and we're talking about positive psychology and how we can learn about happiness and understand what that means and how we can become happy. So let's basically continue with that so that we can finish up the notes, and then we'll be ready to go for our quiz on stress and health. So if we look globally at populations who rank the happiest on self-reported surveys, um, we see that people in general really vary greatly, right? Like even within countries, there's varying levels of happiness that people can have in their lives. Even in the same environment, even in the same family, right? People are vastly different. Um, but in terms of global happiness, about 10 to 12 years ago, the data showed that the five happiest countries were Denmark, Switzerland, Austria, Iceland, and the Bahamas. Um, It'd be hard to be sad in the Bahamas, I guess. I don't know. But those have actually stayed pretty much consistent. The Northern European countries tend to be happier than elsewhere in the world. U.S. was ranked number 23 with this data, and again, that's about where the U.S. shows up almost all the time in the low 20s. It's important to remember that a couple things with we see that some of the more industrialized nations are rank happier, right? That there's certain life satisfaction that comes with being able to provide basic necessities, but we also see that there are some other countries that are pretty happy even if they are relatively poor. um, and right, so we know that the classic phrase is money can't buy happiness, but a certain level of money certainly can, right? There's the base level of meeting your needs, that does make people happy, and we can see that in this data here. Now, what about a genetic component to happiness, right? Is this, are some people just more predisposed genetically to be happy? And when we look at twin studies, they seem to have, that there's a heritable aspect to happiness. People seem to have, just like with their weight, a set point. That default range is probably linked to brain structure and neurochemistry. Although we have different experiences can push people away from their set points for a brief period of time, people usually come back to their general feeling of happiness, and we see that in twin studies and in other um, issues, and in other types of studies looking at happiness. Um, we also tend to overestimate the extent to which positive and negative events will impact our happiness, right? So we think like, oh my gosh, if we, just do this, then I'll be happy. And then you get it and you're still not happy, right? That we kind of have this, or, oh my God, if this happens to me, I'll be devastated. And you're not actually as unhappy as you thought you'd be. So you see that there's, kind of this push and pull in terms of how people are responding to happiness and to life events, that we tend to overinflate the impact that things will have on our lives, like winning the lottery. Studies show that winning the lottery does have an immediate increase in our happiness, but when we look at things over time, people who win the lottery might not feel that happy after all. Studies examining the correlations between wealth and happiness look at both the national and individual level, suggest that once people have the means to cover basic physical needs and safety, additional wealth has little impact on our happiness. And we can look at that through this data here, right? So as income increases, especially societally, over time, again, adjusted for inflation, um, then we see that there's very little. There's some spikes here or there, but there's very little change in our life satisfaction across the country. Um, but we also know that poverty does have significant challenge, does present significant challenges to happiness, right? If you don't have enough money to make ends meet, right, that causes stress, that causes anxiety, that causes a decrease in happiness. Um, so when we look back to the lottery winner, right, there's usually an immediate boost, right, especially if someone was struggling to make ends meet, and then after that, it pretty much tapers off, right? Remember, we talked before about relative happiness that we or that we kind of adjust to a certain lifestyle. We see that in a lot of different data. Now, a couple other things in terms of relationship status, right? Is being in a relationship make you happier? Uh, yes, our close friendships have a strong impact on our happiness. If we look at average levels across people's lives and through cross-sectional studies, those in a committed relationship and people who are married are on average happier than single people, people who are divorced, um, and other people who are kind of living on their own. Um, Also, interestingly enough, widowed people tend to be quite happy after the initial grief period is over. Just having had that committed relationship tends to make people happier in general. Um, and although happy people are more likely to marry, right, when we do longitudinal studies, we find that marriage increases people's happiness, even controlling for other things. So, just the act of getting married can increase people's happiness, even though the people who get married tend to be happier than people who stay single their whole lives. Um, but it's also important to remember that when we talk about marriage and those kinds of things, we also just mean having close, supportive relationships, right? These things are really important, whether that's, a romantic partner or really good friends. Those things are really, really important. And when we look at, in the next unit, when we start looking at personality, right, we're going to start looking at personality traits. So when we look at personality traits and how it relates to happiness, we see that these trait theorists, right, that we kind of have these behaviors that cluster around similar ideas, emphasize individual differences that are important in social interaction. So when we look at um, positive psychology, right? And we look at traits that emphasize well-being and contribute to well-being. So, uh, researcher Chris Peterson developed a taxonomy of character strengths and virtues that we're going to take a quick look at here. Basically, a positive psychology equivalent to the DSM, which we haven't really talked too much about the DSM. Um, but basically, the DSM is how the psychological community treats psychological disorders, has their symptoms and their prevalence rates and all those things. So we know when we talk about positive traits, we see a number of them: wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, transcendence, right? Um, so we can see that these are kind of all related to the meaningful life, right? Or even the good life, right? There's not much in the positive trait aspects of our studies in the pleasant life, right? It's just not as lasting. So when we look at things like meaningful lives, right? People who are, try to give back to the community tend to be happier. Okay, and then when we go back to our social psych unit, we know that institutions play a major role in our well-being. So we also know that institutions can bring out the worst in us, right? Think of the Stanford Prison Experiment. Think of the um, Milgram's obedience study, right? That we can have situations that may bring out the worst in us. But if that's true, then we can find situations that bring out the best in us. And again, that's what positive psychology is focusing on. So these include looking at the positive aspects of institutions, workplaces, schools, right? What are things that are done in these positive environments that make people happy? Across all of these, we know that positive institutions, right, institutions that generate this, have clear goals and an identity, something that people can find themselves a part of, that they know, what the expectations are. They have fair and consistent rules, right? So again, people know, what the rules are and how to follow them. They're safe. They treat people with respect, and they feature, reciprocal caring and investment. So basically, I care about the institution, and I know that the institution cares about me. Or I know that, if we're talking about a workplace, I know that I care about my work, and that my boss cares about, me and my well-being and my happiness as well. Um, so we see that positive psychology tries to outline the types of institutions that will have these positive impacts on us, so that they can, create them going forward. I'm also just going to point out the fact that that speed limit sign says 23 miles an hour, and I've never seen anything like that. And I love that picture, because how do you go 23, right? Is 25 too fast? I don't know. I don't know. But apparently, having that clear expectation that 23 miles an hour makes people feel part of a community, I guess. I don't know. Maybe that's what they're trying to get at. But that's it for our notes, guys. That's it for stress and health. We'll be having a quiz on this shortly. So any questions that you have, please, you know how to reach out to me and ask me those questions. And I will see you guys next time I see you.